All right, folks. Look, we're live, and I'm trying to patch this together as best as I can. I have no audio on Matt's end. Maybe you guys could hear Matt. Matt, if you want to talk, go ahead. See if any of the audience member could hear Matt. Hit the number one. If you can't, hit number two.
Yeah, that's
Go
a
ahead,
good
Matt,
idea.
start talking.
Can people hear me? Can people hear me right now? You have a few seconds to write number one or make some announcement that you can hear me, people out there, because V cannot hear me.
All right. Looks like people can hear you, Matt. Yep, everybody can hear Matt. Okay, this is great, wonderful. So Matt and I'm gonna let Matt go, and I'm going to I'm just whatever questions they're gonna pose. They're gonna pose it right in the private communications that I have with Matt. So Matt, he needs no introduction. Check him out, risingtidefoundation.net, as well as the Canadian Patriot. CanadianPatriot.com. And with that being said, Matthew Ehret, welcome back, sir. Go for it, buddy.
Thank you, V. Yeah, this is going to be a weird one. I'm using my cell phone both to communicate with you with my thumbs as well as speak to the audience. So I'm going to see if I can do this with as little disturbance as possible. This is going to be tough, though. So anyway, thanks for having me on once again, as we do every week, V. I think that what we wanted to talk about, we don't have a lot of time today, but what we wanted to just provide is a little bit of a weekly overview of the world as it is. So I'm going to just say a few things about some of the breaking events and just sort of set that in context. And then we'll go from there and figure out how do we interact. I'm not too sure how that's going to work out, but essentially, I mean, we are facing, as your audience knows, a clash of two systems, right? Anybody who's been watching your program, has been following your channel, is very much aware that the world is currently being pulled by two separate futures. And this week in the Middle East, we've seen an incredible array of singularities that I think are worth just discussing briefly. But obviously, the Belt and Road Initiative has really transformed the rules of the game, especially since 2013 when it was first announced. Since 2017-18, it really began making its presence known in the Middle East, in the Arab states. Africa already has increasingly jumped on board, but there's an effort to pull the Middle East as well as Africa, which has been the targets of a lot of geopolitical manipulations in two separate directions. This week, we've had the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a sort of, I mean, as everyone knows, it's a major security system that was set up in the 1999 period. The ball got rolling. I think it was in 2001 that it was really set up with the China-Russia bedrock. But since then, there's been many other nations who have joined. Uzbekistan, most of the stands have joined. Pakistan is a member. India is an observer. But they had a major meeting on the 14th of July, where it involved high-level discussions with foreign ministers, many experts from around the world, on what to do with the new vacuum that's been created, so-called, by the new U.S. policy in the Middle East, specifically the the removal of troops from Afghanistan. Now, this is not quite what it seems or how it's being portrayed in the media, because obviously there's still 18,000 contractors. There's many black ops types, things like that I've seen no evidence are leaving. And we also know that a big chunk of how the U.S. or the Anglo-American foreign policy establishment has done regime change across the Middle East and Africa, but especially the Middle East for the past decades, has been through subversive covert weapons being provided from the CIA, from intelligence networks, as well as from obviously proxies like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Specifically, Qatar has been the most active in many ways, as well as Turkey. And we know that the Idlib province has been an Al-Qaeda hub, a major Al-Qaeda hub in Syria for some time. So we know that we have, on the one hand, an apparent withdrawal of troops, and we have certain usefulness that's coming with that, specifically discussions now to bring rail lines from Pakistan that connect Pakistan, Iran, Uzbekistan through Afghanistan. There's high-level discussions to connect Kabul through Pakistan with the CPEC, the extension of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Highways are being discussed, other forms of fiber optics that connect many of the nations through Afghanistan, which is, historically a hub of the old Silk Road. It's moving potentially to recapture that role. While on the other hand, you have a battle over what will the Taliban's role be, because you have, we have Russia, we have China, who have agreed by and large that the Taliban must be treated as a partner on the negotiating tables to try to create a working relationship with the current government. The Taliban, they control something like 50% of the Afghan territory. None of the capitals yet, but they have a huge stronghold. And, if you look at the West, going back even to the point that we look at Afghanistan as a whole, there has been an effort to try to paint the Taliban as the cause of not only al-Qaeda, but also of 9/11. That was the excuse that got NATO countries to get into Afghanistan to begin with, which, again, if any of your our listeners have not been living under a rock, we know that that whole story was a fraud that had more to do with Anglo-American and some Saudi intelligence agencies and less to do with anything the Taliban was doing. So, on the one hand, we have had, Donald Trump tried this last year to get a diplomatic agreement with the Taliban, which actually worked quite well at a certain point until I think his name was Ambassador Jeffrey. What's his name? James Jeffrey worked very hard to sabotage a big chunk of that, as well as certain other forces within the U.S. deep state. But all that to say, what had happened when Trump negotiated to get the Taliban to sit down at the table, there was a subversion where there was a bit of a peace treaty on the one hand with the United States to stop killing, to basically stop with the firefights and the drone attacks and everything else. And then within days, you had from the Pentagon operations conducted to conduct nighttime drone strikes, night raids that basically undermined the peace process that was going on. So Russia and China are currently reawakening that. We also know that there is both again, the Taliban have played a negative role in many ways in the last 20 years, but it's within the whole context of a broader, insane geopolitical operation to basically light the world on fire, starting with the Middle East, and to undermine the weak underbelly of Russia, but also of China. So, China and Russia currently are hoping that the Taliban work very hard to end terrorism. The Taliban has demonstrated that it doesn't want Afghanistan to be a dope economy. Well, while the Taliban were in control before the U.S. jumped in there in 2001, we know that they had wiped out most of the opium production. Today, Afghanistan is the source of about 80% of the world opium heroin production. That's a huge quantity. So that also goes through drug money laundering outfits on Wall Street in London that support the black economy. And I don't mean black people here, but everyone should know what I'm talking about. In fact, it's a big part of what's been victimizing the black community since the 70s, when Bush Sr. started really a program inside the United States to infuse dope, and we're talking like crack in the black neighborhoods of the United States as part of a cultural warfare operation. So this has been going on for a long time. We know that the Taliban shut that down when the U.S. came in there. It increased to up to 95% at the max. Today it's 80%. China and Russia want to wipe that out, and they're providing, again, real economic development. We know that Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, has been on a rampage, a wonderful rampage, going from all sorts of different Stan countries, as well as Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, but also Algeria, Syria, Egypt. And before going to Algeria, Syria, and Egypt, he went to before going to Algeria and Egypt, he went to Syria. And in Syria, on the 18th, just a few days ago, he met with Bashar al-Assad. We know that they arranged economic agreements to both officially bring in Syria into the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative. We know that they had agreements on energy, on certain economic programs, as well as health arrangements that were set up as well. Same discussions are going on in Egypt. Egypt is currently and has been at a bit of a standstill in some ways economically, where the plans to double the Suez Canal have not borne the types of economic boom that they were hoping, but that has a lot to do with other international geopolitical games that are preventing the real flow of goods from east to west. In Syria, one of the big problems is a lack of food and a lack of energy. The cause of that, I mean, there's a huge food crisis right now. A big chunk of the population is facing food insufficiency. And the fact is that, you know, the U.S. military, both the Caesar sanctions, so the U.S. government, which has sanctioned Syria, has prevented food from going into that zone, has prevented vital oil shipments to go through. And any country, as people know, doing business with a nation sanctioned by the United States, whether it's Iran or whether it's Syria, will themselves be prohibitively sanctioned. So very few have the means to actually conduct business with Syria. That's created a huge scarcity. And on top of that, we also know, unfortunately, that there's major reliable reports of the U.S. military having burnt wheat crops and confiscated even grain deposits in Syria too, only exacerbating the problem. Currently, I think Syria only has something like 1 hour they have of electricity every 5 hours. That's terrible for refrigeration, for healthcare needs, and other things. So they definitely need the Belt and Road Initiative to come in and reconstruct. One of the things that, I mean, Biden is being celebrated for as a peacemaker amongst a lot of the liberal media is due in, like I mentioned, you know, on the surface, there's a retraction of troops from Afghanistan. However, we also know that there's been a redirection of energy towards two things. One, giving a makeover to Al-Qaeda and a lot of the Al-Qaeda fronts like Jabhat al-Nusra and forgetting the other one, but a newer one, what's called the Hayat Shahrir. Anyway, it basically got a new name in recent years, and PBS brought the head of Al-Qaeda on just a few weeks ago in a business suit, gelled hair and everything. The Syrian girl who does some really wonderful videos did a really good 10-minute broadcast on this just a few days ago. But basically PBS, a government-sponsored, U.S. government-sponsored channel, brought the head of Al-Qaeda on as a new form of moderate fighter, a new freedom fighter, just like they had done in the 80s when Zbigniew Brzezinski launched the program in Afghanistan originally to overthrow the moderate government that was pro-Soviet by using mujahideen operations and other radical outfits to inflame the Islamic card, right? To play radical Islamic madrasas into an operation that would then destabilize Afghanistan, the pro-Soviet Afghan government, which was very progressive. I mean, back in the 70s and up to 1980, there was programs to
All right, folks. I don't know what happened. I think we just lost Matthew. He should be logging back on at any point. I'm not sure what's happening. We're having some issues here with StreamYard, our platform. Hold on one second. I'm hearing myself here. It's the platform that we're using to stream to multi-platforms. And again, this is what happens when we don't have El Cuco here. Yours truly falls apart. So I apologize profusely for this. Matthew should be coming on at any second. And Matthew's right. You know, there's a lot of things happening in the Middle East. A lot of these Al-Qaeda retreads are being rebranded as moderates, and they're appearing on PBS. They're appearing on BBC. They're appearing on, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, we had a former guy who was like one of the head guys over at ISIS rebranded, and he was sat down in a nice Western suit, and they put him now as a Syrian rebel. He's a freedom fighter now. He's a freedom fighter, and he's out there giving an interview with the BBC. Let me check with Matt and see where he's at. Hold on one second, folks. Okay, yeah. So we should have Matt back on any time. Just gonna relax and thank you, Rob. I'm definitely gonna be relaxing. All right, Matt's coming back in. All right.
Okay.
All right, Matthew, all right, everyone. Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, V, I'm assuming you still can't hear me, right? I'm just going to write you a little message. Okay. So, all right. So I'm presuming that V still cannot hear me. And I have no idea where I left off. Because I don't know where I left off, I'm going to presume that people know that I was talking about Zbigniew Brzezinski. V has written to me that people can hear me, but not V. So it looks like I have the stage. However, I can hear you, V. So I don't know why other people cannot hear you. That's weird. Okay, left off the PBS interview with... Right. Okay, so the last thing people heard was me talking about the PBS interview with the head of Al-Qaeda, painting him as a moderate. So there's a certain lipstick being put on the pig, same old pig. And obviously there is an effort to change, basically just not call Al-Qaeda Al-Qaeda and present it as something other than what it is while providing weapons. And I mentioned the Syrian girl already, but she did in this 10-minute, very, very well put together interview video that people can get on her main YouTube page. She has a list of receipts that were a part of a $350 million military contract signed by Biden with 8 European military industrial firms, and they're all based in Eastern Europe. Bulgaria, I forget the other ones, Romania, the former Soviet production zone. So part of this is she posits to create a plausible deniability as these weapons are being flooded into the Middle East to create an increased instability, which, I mean, the Anglo-American deep state is petrified of the idea of the success of the Belt and Road Initiative throughout the Middle East, both connecting rail from Pakistan, from China, from Iran, through Iran into Iraq, into Syria, where there are ports like Latakia, run by effectively Iran, or Tartarus on the Mediterranean, which has a 49-year lease with Russia. So they're completely afraid of real development and integration happening in the Middle East zone. So that's where you have obviously an operation to project an image of being peaceful while at the same time doing the very opposite and inflaming arson everywhere, putting fuel on the fire across the board. We know, again, I mentioned Trump. Now, Trump tried to get that negotiation with the Taliban a long time ago, a year ago. That was sabotaged. We know that he had made efforts to retract troops from Syria and Iraq. We know that from the interviews given by McGregor, I think that was in February or January, that the Pentagon and the CIA subverted that. He was given false information from Ambassador Jeffrey on several occasions, giving a false image of how many troops were actually in Syria and what the terms were on the ground. And we also had, Trump's attempt to fire Gina Haspel, which Mark Milley directly intervened on to block, which is uncalled for to actually intervene against the sitting president as head of strategic command. Also efforts to detach the CIA and the Pentagon from the conventional military, and to also defund things like U.S. aid that had been used as a Soros front CIA outfit to destabilize governments around the world. That had been done to retract and seriously cut the legs off of the CIA's capability to provide covert weapons to operations in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Trump had also gone quite far in doing that. And over the last several months, there has been a complete reversal of all of these things. So, we have an obvious intention to blow the zone up. And so I'm just saying all of this because a lot of people I'm noticing, turning into mental jelly and just feeding off of the propaganda that the Biden administration is giving itself. The other thing is that in the current age, the current strategic world, we see that the conventional old school terrorism as an excuse to create wars, to expand police state protocols. Those are not really the favorite operation anymore as they were for the past 20 years. Instead, what we have is a shifting of gears towards domestic terrorism. So obviously, you know, the recent revelations over the past few weeks of new government agencies to oversee social media, the integration of the US government with private social media, big tech firms to counteract misinformation, whether it's Russian or Chinese or, you know, white supremacist misinformation that's casting doubt on the government narrative of COVID-19 or whatever. Basically thought crimes. That's going forward and expanding massively, while at the same time, you know, we have these crazy speeches. You know, you just listen to some of these things where Biden was delivering a speech comparing the events of January 6th, which, I mean, there's been a lot written about this. We've spoken about this. This appears to be completely an inside job Reichstag fire with provocateurs and intelligence agency operatives on the ground initiating the worst aspects of that day. But Biden was comparing this day to the worst of the Civil War, saying that even at the heart of the Civil War, the Confederates were never able to pierce the Capitol. But we've fallen so far. So obviously, this is a shifting of gears in some ways to declare a type of a war that's already been going on, but to really accelerate that onto the parts of the U.S. population itself, which would otherwise tend to reject a total depopulation, green fascism, which would ultimately undo the Constitution and everything that our past forebears had fought for, while at the same time trying to expand this idea of a new build back better green economy to the world as a whole to try to counteract the BRI, which is what the G7 came out with just after the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit was over. There was basically a meeting where Biden and many other of his coterie of tools for the deep state announced that, for Afghanistan, we are going to try to usher them into the build back better for the world strategy, which is just essentially a green initiative, which is a boondoggle that cannot be funded, just like the U.S. Infrastructure budget, which is, not even a draft yet. It's so far from reality, but it has no funding mechanism. It has no way of funding it. The U.S. is beyond bankrupt already. It's a big bubble economy. So they're talking about these green solar panel energy grids with, being funded by cap and trades. And it can't happen, but they're that delusional, while at the same time talking about internationalizing that. And some countries are dumb enough to go along with it. I feel like I'm just ranting right now, but that's what we got to do, I guess. You look at both Australia, which was a part of China's, the most historic economic arrangement in the Pacific zone of 14 nations that had signed on to the Pacific Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement. And Australia was a part of it. India was not a part of it, but Australia was a part of it. And they chose instead to continue on with their cancellation of China's investments into BRI connected projects in Australia. China was actually building. They had agreements set up in 2018, 2019 to build with Chinese help and funding in many ways, major infrastructure projects, which Australia vitally needs. And they canceled it all to be a part of this quad global build back better insanity. It's insane. And then Iraq, who you need to have Iraq on. Currently, I don't know a lot of the details, but I know that the former government of al-Mahdi signed a BRI deal with China. And it's very similar to what China did with Iran. Slightly smaller scale. I mean, the Iranian deal that's now completely finalized on energy and security is a $400 billion 25-year deal, which involves Iran providing cheap oil to China at a discount, while China is going to be providing massive amounts of energy and infrastructure investment into Iran. There's many other elements to this, involving also a security element to it, which is interesting. So the Iraq deal in 2019 that al-Mahdi signed was very similar, with a multi-phase modernization program to connect rail, built by China throughout much of Iraq to help Iraq build soft infrastructure, hospitals, healthcare, schools, as well as hard infrastructure, which it vitally needs in exchange for discounted oil. Now, the current government completely reneged on that, said, well, that was the former government making a deal when oil prices were very low. Today, oil prices are much higher, so we're going to just cancel our agreement and just make more money now. Now, how short-sighted is that? Oil prices could plummet again. It's all based on speculation. So he's sacrificing his nation's future to get some momentary financial gain in the present and cutting off, at least for the time, Iraq's relationship with the Belt and Road Initiative. Iraq is and will be continuously an important part of this, but right now it's kind of out of play at the moment. Doesn't matter so much when you look at all of the other things going on. And, as we've talked about in many of our previous shows, the Belt and Road Initiative is an east-west corridor. We also have the north-south transportation corridor that Russia initiated with Iran back in 2002. It has 17 countries on board. It's been moving slow, but it's speeding up, and it's very synergistic with the Belt and Road Initiative. And that also moves through the entire Middle Eastern zone that we're talking about here, especially Afghanistan, with a port in Gwadar in Pakistan. India, like I said, plays an important role in this, which is vital because India is acting like a bit of a basket case. There are definitely Hindu nationalists that are nuts that are being used by the West to try to create both a NATO of the Pacific with Japan, a Quad as they call it, but also have a bunch of weird ambitions in Afghanistan to expand their interest there as a way to cut off Pakistan and maybe even destabilize Pakistan a little bit more. So that's a problem that has to be resolved. So hopefully these things like the North-South Transportation Corridor, the BRI, and many other things that are associated with those, especially in the funding mechanism side of things, since these are all being funded not necessarily by, the IMF and the World Bank and other Western institutions could participate, but they're not driving the show. They're not directing anything. These are being funded by primarily Asian based financial institutions, things like the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the BRICS Development Fund. The development bank is not as much active as it should be, but this is definitely a powerful potential instrument for driving credit. Putin currently is working very hard to try to expel whatever is there of the Russian deep state, which has, in some cases, a lot of administrative control in the regions, in the cities, especially in Moscow. There's current reforms happening there to circumvent that and to give greater control to the federal government, to force credit to flow where it's needed in the development of Russia's Arctic and comprehensive infrastructure, which it hasn't really been able to do as well by far as China has. Largely because Russia went through the Gorbachev era, the Yeltsin-Gorbachev perestroika in the 1990s, whereas China was smart enough to kick out Soros and to kick out their Soros operative Zhao Ziyang, who was the head of the Chinese Communist Party from 1987 to 89, and he's the guy who worked. He was called the Chinese Gorbachev. And he's the guy who managed Tiananmen Square. He set up a think tank with George Soros. He brought in Milton Friedman, all of these libertarian economic theorists into brainwashing the Chinese elite, the young elite in Beijing and other parts of China and Shanghai. So that was expelled. China was smart. They understood the nature of the dismantling quicker than Russia did in this case. And they were able to keep control of their central national government mechanisms, banking and other things. So they have the ability to get things done. Whereas because Russia went through that period of dismemberment, balkanization, privatization, they are still recuperating. So there is an increased momentum to heal from that. Putin has done a remarkable job in the past 20 years. That is now moving ahead even faster. And it's happening largely because it has to happen. These guys, the Greater Eurasian Partnership, the leaders of that system, Xi Jinping, Putin, many others, are looking at the West as a basket case, a desperate one, sitting on a bubble, which is a time bomb. that will collapse. It will be detonated. The question is just when and how. What are the predicates of it? And it's not a question of will it happen, it's when. And which one of the many triggers will be used to deploy the chain reaction that will blow out the system. Obviously, coronavirus has been selected as a cover for it to try to deflect people away from the real cause of what this is all about. But it really has nothing to do with coronavirus, as I'm sure, again, everybody knows. This is a bit of a, it's not a bit of it, it's a psyop. So what we have is an offer, China, Russia, the 140 nations working on the BRI projects. The 140 nations have signed memoranda of understanding over the past 7 years to work on the BRI projects. They want a future. They want to work with Western basket case countries that want to find their better selves once again. It's an open offer. There's many olive branches that have been given to us. And the question is just, do we have the moral fitness to survive, accept those olive branches, eat some humble pie, recognize that we've been walking in a bit of a drunken stupor, and like any alcoholic, admit that we have a problem and start a process of healing. That's really essentially on a spiritual level what needs to really happen. And people who are activists in the West, people who are in the political spheres of influence, need to really recognize that they have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders right now. Literally, we're at the end of an era. We're at the end of a system. And we have, like I said at the beginning, we have two futures pulling us in two different directions, and only one of them is worth living in. So with that, I don't think you can hear me, V, but I'm going to send you a little message ending now. So V, I've just sent you a message saying ending now. I hope everyone enjoyed that little mini presentation. And yeah, sorry for the lack of banter between me and V. I know some people like that, and I do too. And I feel a little bit empty when that doesn't happen.
Very well said, Matthew. Thank you so much for being on. And even despite the audio issues, folks, we were able to do this show. So thank you all for listening in. And again, subscribe, like, comment, and share. With that being said, we're over and out. Cheers.